In this clip, we're going to distribute the leaves around the branch. So here we are back, and I haven't yet created the thinner branch, but I'm thinking I'm going to do that later. For now, I'm going to go ahead and actually distribute the leaves here. So I'm going to select these leaves, and I'm going to affect the pivot point here. In the hierarchy, I'm going to select the affect pivot point. I'm just going to go ahead and move that to the bottom of the leaf here, and make sure it's right at the center of the stem. And I'm going to do the same for each one. So I'm just going to move that right about here. Make sure it's not only vertically, but horizontally as well. And also here. That is perfect. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go ahead and select my branch. And I'm going to click Convert to Editable Poly, Attach. And I'm just going to attach all these little branches here. Make sure my background is frozen. And now I'm going to Object Paint. I'm going to select on which object I'm going to paint. So I'm going to select here, paint with the objects in the list. And I'm going to pick the objects, second leaf and a third leaf. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure I have paint on selected. So I'm going to go here, paint on selected object. And then I'm going to go ahead here into rotate, and I'm just going to make sure it's all random here. So random Z, random Y, and random X. For the scale, I'm also going to click random. And I'm going to leave the default settings for now, but we're going to see how that's going to work out. So I'm going to click the paint button here and just start painting. This is a problem that sometimes happens, and that's due to our random scale here. And for some reason, 3ds Max is not exactly perfect with the scale. So I'm just going to right click here and make sure that my X form is reset. So I'm just going to reset the X form, select my branch again, click paint, and it's still a little too big. So now we can go ahead here and maybe select minimum to be 10 and maximum to be 80. So that's a little too small. So let's increase the minimum and increase the maximum a little bit. Perfect. So now I'm going to delete those again and going to start again. So I'm just going to go ahead and select my branch, paint, and just going to go ahead and paint those in. It's very random and it won't be perfect. So what I usually do is I would paint those on as many as I need. And I'm going to try and make it quite thick here. I don't want too much stem on this tree. I want it to look very leafy and very beautiful. So I'm just going to paint a few more. I'm going to make sure I hide most of my branch here. So I'm just going to add one more here, one more here, one more here. So that looks pretty good. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and actually start moving those around manually. So I'm going to go in here and use just the rotate tool at this point. I'm not going to move a lot. I'm just going to move this one here because it's a bit too crowded at this point. So I'm going to put that behind here and going to move that one over here. This one's a little too big, so I'm just going to scale it down a bit, move it up. And this one goes beyond the plane here, so I'm just going to delete this one and move this one a little down. Here we go. And what I want to make sure that the end of the branch is all covered. So I'm going to select here and again make it smaller. Down. And I want the leaves to be slightly oversized. So I do like the stylized trees to have quite a big, thick leaves. But again, it really depends on your style. So if you were to make a real tree, those would be much smaller. Move it around here and move that over here. And that's a very tedious process. You could play around with the distribution settings, but from the experience, I learned that basically it's almost impossible to get it all perfect. So I always tend to just move them by hand. That kind of looks a little odd. So I'm just going to delete this one over here. Move this one up a little bit. And I want to make sure that they all look right and none of them penetrate each other, because that will be quite noticeable, especially the fact that you will be using that same branch to cover the entire tree, really. So you don't want anything to look odd. That over here. That is perfect. And gonna move that one, turn it around. And I want to make sure that it's always the right way around. Don't want to make it look like it's indented, only like it's bumpy. And I'm going to move this one to our branches just to make it a little bit more smoother. Gonna move it here. And this one over here. And I'm just gonna hold shift and duplicate this one and make it a little bigger. Put it on that side over here. Move that one around. And again, it cannot go beyond the plane. The plane is our reference for our texture. So we got one here that is a little too far. So let's move that down. that one down. Just don't want the little stamps to be too visible, so I'm just going to try and get them all going through our branch here. So that's okay. And let's fix this one. Put that over here. And again, I want as much size definition as possible, but I want the majority of the leaves to be quite chunky and big. It's looking good. I'm just going to move that over here and move that down right about here. And there's so many different ways you can cover the tree with foliage. You can even just use, for instance, just cylindrical shapes and give them a leaf texture. Depends on how stylized you want your work to be. I prefer to have individual leaves. Again, if I was to work for a very cartoony company that would make a super stylized trees, I would probably end up using just a single mesh for the trees and maybe a couple leaves just to break the silhouette a bit. So that looks pretty good. Going to make sure that some of these small stamps don't look too large. So I'm just going to go through a little bit. Put that over here. And that looks really good. So I'm just going to hide my wireframe at this point and see what I got. So a little bit too repetitive. So I'm going to go ahead and actually clear a few leaves off just so I can get a really nice silhouette here. I'm just going to move that over here. Over here. And just looking at the shapes of the leaves here, just trying to make sure that everything looks right. Right about here. And move that one and push it over here. This one a little too much. That one here too. Get rid of this small one. Actually, let's move ahead and move it right about here. Let's get rid of this one. So at this point, I'm just clearing a few off because there's a little bit too many. And it kind of creates this weird silhouette here. So I'm deleting a few here. Move that one up here. And again, it's very much subjective. So really depending on how you want your tree to look, you would populate your branches differently. So I'm going to move that here. And I think I'm pretty happy with the result. So this is it for this clip. In the next clip, we're going to go ahead and have a final overview of the tutorial and see what we learned. And I'll teach you some more tricks and hints for the future.